Hello, I'm the Media Wiz, because one art form wasn't enough, and welcome back to another movie vlog. This was requested by my fellow content creator, Jaimetud. He suggested this movie just based solely on the fact that the movie looked weird, and, that it looked like a very trippy 70s experimental Terry Gilliam type movie. And, I figured, okay, yeah, I'm kind of working on this other review, but it's a double feature, so I'll work a little more on that for next week, and I figured this would be a good movie to talk about for this week. The movie is called Fantastic Planet. It is a French Czechoslovakian co-production. It's based on a book. Of course, it's a French book, and it's a science fiction novel that also has a lot of contemporary social commentary, and that definitely shows with the final film. But it apparently had a very rocky production, and I gotta say, learning about this movie, I was actually very fascinated to see what the final product was like. And sure enough, I would say the movie actually is really good if you're into very trippy 70s experimental films. But I feel like it's much more than that. It's not just some artsy fartsy, oh, it's pretentious, it looks weird kind of movie. I feel like this kind of movie, it's clearly an animated movie aimed at an older audience, but it's not one of those like, oh, it's when people think adult animation, look at this year. We had that Gennady Tartakovsky movie that went to Netflix, Fixed, and that apparently sparked a lot of divide amongst audiences. I guess some people liked it, some people didn't. I still haven't seen it yet, but typically nowadays when you hear adult animation, that's typically what people lean to. It's like, oh, it's like like a lot of indie web animation stuff too. But it really isn't like that. This falls more into the category of animated movies that they're aimed at older audiences, but they're not meant to be comedic. They sort of fall into the vein of like, Terry Gilliam, I said earlier, and I feel like that's a good comparison. And I can talk a little bit more about that, especially when we talk about the animation. But I feel like a movie like this, it falls more into the category of like Fantastic Mr. Fox or Isle of Dogs or whenever Guillermo del Toro does animated movies, like his Pinocchio movie, for example. I feel like that's another great comparison. It's one of those animated movies where it's clearly aimed at an older audience, but it also has something to say. And it's carried by, one, the visuals, and two, the tone and its themes. And there's a wide variety of them all throughout this thing. Another movie it kind of made me think of was WALL-E, because WALL-E had a bunch of different little messages intertwined all throughout, like, the the fear of over-consumerism and over-commercialism and, environmentalism and, healthier habits and all that kind of stuff. Going back to its history before we talk about what the movie's about, this movie was interesting to learn about at the very least, to learn about the original book, to learn about like the people behind it. They did a couple of animated shorts before this. They had a thing called The Snails and Time of Death, I think is what it was called. I'm sadly blanking on it right now, but they were both animated in a very similar style, which the style of animation that's in this movie, it's basically a form of stop motion, and this goes into the Terry Gilliam comparison. The animation style that's in this movie pretty much was a big inspiration for the animation that you would see Gilliam do in Monty Python. And it really shows. The animation style, even down to the art style, it has this very Terry Gilliam kind of Dr. Seuss look to it, which I think helps the movie a lot. It definitely gives the movie a signature look. It gives it its own identity. I did like that aspect of it. It also took them forever to make this movie. This movie started production in like 1964, 1965, somewhere around there. But they meant to make the movie a lot sooner, but the production just kept getting pushed back because I think at first they were running out of money. And then, I think a year after they started losing money to work on the movie, Czechoslovakia then got invaded by the Soviet Union. And, obviously, under big authoritarian governments like that, they didn't like, pieces of media that were spreading the word of, rising up against the oppressor. And there are a lot of themes of that in this movie. Oh, before I forget, too, this movie, there's 3 different versions of it. There's the original French version, there's one without dialogue, and there's one with an English dub. I watched the one with the English dub. I skimmed through the original French one just to see what that was like. And despite a few dialogue changes here and there, I didn't find it too terribly egregious with the changes they made. So I don't know, that's just me. I never really had a problem with dubs. I know a lot of people have the grand dub versus sub debate, but I never really minded it. But enough of that. What is the movie about? Well, it takes place on this planet that's inhabited by these giant fish-like humanoids called Draags. And then you got these things called ohms, which are supposed to be human. I think ohm is either the French word for man or it's some kind of play on the French word for man. But they're supposed to be humans, and they're about this big, like the size of an action figure or like a micro machine, essentially. But yeah, since Draags are huge, and they're pretty much portrayed as emotionless the entire movie, they don't really seem to care. I mean, even when some of them care for ohms as like pets or toys, it's obviously a very superficial kind of care. I mean, like there's even points where they pit ohms against each other to watch them fight for their own amusement. So yeah, you can tell that one of the many themes of this movie is trying to make a statement on if man were put in the same situation that say humans put animals or some other creature that man typically perceives as below it, then obviously we'd be pit into a way worse situation. And the movie doesn't stray away from how sad or how dark these situations can be. I mean, the movie begins with a woman running to try and escape, because they establish there's like a whole colony of ohms or humans that are out in these like kind of wooded or desert areas where there's a bunch of plants and foliage, as well as a bunch of other creatures that they have to go up against to just simply see another day. But there's this woman running away with her child, and she ends up dying, and the child is then taken in by a Draag who cares for it, but again, it's very superficial in the same way that maybe some pet owners are superficial with how they care for their pets. They put like these shock collars on the humans to put them in a more submissive state, basically like whittling the human down to where they're, essentially a pet and they're content with living this lifestyle. And so, yeah, a lot of that carries through the first half of the film until eventually the child grows up and finally finds a way to escape and comes across this little resistance group of ohms. And so from there, along with them trying to survive in the wilderness of this planet that the Draags live on, you alternate between seeing the Draags and how they live. And the Draags are a very, like I said, emotionless, very authoritative kind of society. They rule, like they pretty much have no sympathy or empathy for the ohms. Like, and again, the times they do show some kind of superficial caring for them, it really is just like, oh well, they keep them alive just for their own amusement, essentially. But the humans ultimately decide to fight back with this boy who grows into a young man leading the resistance. So there's a bunch of imagery in there that, of course, at the time, the Soviet Union didn't take kindly to, because it was pretty much saying that, the humans, who are the oppressed on this planet are trying to rise up against the ones in power, who are the Draags. I mean, there's a scene where you could definitely tell what it was supposed to be symbolizing, where a giant Draag foot just trying to stomp down on all the humans, and as best as they try to push the foot back up, I think the foot does come down and crush a bunch of people. So you could definitely see that it's supposed to be making a commentary about authoritarianism. I guess you could say, in the means of like government, but it can also apply to a bunch of other things as well. You see, there's a reason why I didn't do this movie in the traditional review style, because a movie like this, it's weird, but it's not bad. It's like you really just have to like look into the subtext of a movie like this. And I mean, there's plenty of other movies that I've watched and talked about for videos where it's like, it's good, you just have to be in the type of audience for a movie like this. I mean, if you're into these kind of more adult animated movies that tackle a bunch of heady subjects under layers of metaphor. I mean, like going back to Gilliam, I mean, this definitely feels like a Terry Gilliam movie. I mean, you look at something like Brazil, this definitely falls into that kind of category where it's like, you get what they're saying because it's pretty apparent what they're trying to say, but it's obviously done under layers of like, oh, like I get what they're trying to say. They're not outwardly saying it, but you get what they're saying. Sort of like how the themes of Brazil were meant to sort of criticize things like bureaucracy and freedom of thought and all that kind of thing. And they pretty much do the same kind of thing in this movie. And honestly, depending on who you are, I feel like even no matter what your stance on things are, I feel like you could generally take away a lot of the themes from this movie and go, I see what they were trying to say, without it feeling too ham-fisted or crowbarred. Now, near the end of the movie, you have it that the humans are able to build 2 rockets and they get off the planet successfully. And they go to the titular Fantastic Planet. They end up landing on this planet which the Draags use as, like, a mating ground. Because, okay, going back to the weird Terry Gilliam imagery, they end up on this planet and you see a bunch of, like, statue-like bodies that have no heads on them. But earlier in the movie, they established that the Draags, they take these kind of drugs that take them into this, like, trance-like state. Which, to the average viewer, it was the 70s. It was made in the late 60s. These drugs kind of take them into this world where these statue-like bodies that have no heads, they have these bubble things that are supposed to be operated by the Draags, and they land on the bodies, and the statues, like, they just kind of start, like, rubbing up against each other. So it's supposed to be some kind of, like, mating ritual planet or something. I don't know. But, the humans use this to their advantage because they start destroying the statues. So then the Draags realize that, like, oh no, the humans can actually outnumber us, and they're actually doing something that could potentially end our species. The movie actually has a happy ending, which I was genuinely surprised about. I looked into the book a little bit. I forget if this alters from the book's ending, but ultimately the Draags decide they need some kind of peaceful compromise or some kind of alliance. So the Draags decide to let the Ohms go free, and they finally let all the Ohms have their own planet, which is the moon of their planet, and they decide to have this alliance where, they can finally live in peaceful coexistence. And I guess one thing to criticize about the ending, I've seen a few people say this, they said that the ending felt rushed. And it's sort of that same thing I said when I talked about Raggedy Ann and Andy, A Musical Adventure, where you could tell that they kind of rushed the ending because they were running out of money. And I kind of got the exact same feeling here with this movie. I feel like if you're into these kind of more experimental art house kind of movies, or again, these animated movies that are aimed towards older audiences, but they're not trying to be like Family Guy or South Park or Rick and Morty or something like that. Like, they're the kind of animated movies where they actually have a lot more to say, and if you're a fan of like Guillermo del Toro movies or Terry Gilliam movies, I feel like you actually are going to get a lot out of this film. Like I said, this is typically not the kind of movie I would review because of a lot of the subject matter. So I feel like that's partially why I did this as a vlog, because I did want to talk about this movie, but I felt like doing it in the structure of a typical MediaWiz review wouldn't really work. I mean, compared to what we looked at last time, which was Kids Next Door, Operation Zero, and what we're looking at next week, which is going to be a double feature of the live-action Ben 10 movies. But I still wanted to talk about this movie because I was curious to see how it would be, and after doing some research and learning about the film's history, I think I appreciate this movie a little bit more. Yeah, if you're curious, check it out. But yeah, like I said, next week we're going to be talking about the 2 live-action Ben 10 movies that went straight to TV, so yeah, that'll certainly be interesting, I guess. But not as interesting as Fantastic Planet because, yeah, this movie definitely didn't have a shortage of bizarre, weird, surrealist imagery. So, yeah, that does it for this video. Until next time, I'm the MediaWiz, because one art form wasn't enough.